Good afternoon and welcome to today's Counselor Connect session on implementing a trauma-informed schools program. My name is Amanda Callahan and I am the coordinator for Counselor Connect, which is a statewide initiative supporting student service professionals operated by the Central Indiana Educational Service Center, or CIESC. And I am thrilled to be joined by special guest today, Trudi Wolfe. Trudi is an Indianapolis Trauma Therapy Center. She will probably say maybe a little bit more about herself as she gets started. So with that, I'm just going to turn it right over to you, Trudi, and you can share anything more you want to share about yourself, and then go ahead and start with your slides.
Hi, I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you for spending a little part of your day with us, and I hope you find this presentation helpful. I worked for about 20 years in mental health settings, and then I worked in school settings as a school counselor or school social worker for another 20 years. So I just retired at the end of last school year, and I've had experiences helping two schools set up trauma-informed practices. So I hope you find this information helpful, and I think we're ready to go, Amanda. This is a very common visual representation of what a trauma-informed school is. And I've just relabeled a couple of the pillars there. And I think the main thing about safety is it's not locks on the doors or SROs in the building. It's really felt safety from the perspective of the student. Am I safe in this place with this person at this moment? And then relationships is the cornerstone of everything we do. And managing emotions is really co-regulation. We eventually hope, the students can get to the point where they can implement some of the regulation strategies themselves. But it really begins with co-regulation, using our own calm presence to calm the child. Okay. And then before you get started as a school counselor or social worker, it is vital that you have your principal's support 100%. And, as school counselors, we can't really do a lot by ourselves. But if we have our principal telling the staff, I want us to be trauma informed. I want us to get to the point where trauma responsive. The teachers will have a better reception to the information that you share. And then it's really important you lay your foundation. Teachers need to know why you're doing these things. If they don't understand the why, they're not going to be ready to implement these things. So, start with your professional development, applied educational neuroscience, information about relationships and trauma, and then co-regulation. And a good way to do, another way to lay the foundation is book studies. And these are just some examples. And most of these books, I have done book studies at my schools. They've been very well received. And you don't have to feel like you have to have a weekly meeting with your teachers to do a book study. In fact, when I was working at Beech Grove, all of our book studies took place over the summer. So we had a shared Google folder, and each week I made a new document, and it was on that reading for the week. And I entered my contribution first about my thoughts about the chapter, and then everybody joined in. So we were learning from each other. And then we had about 2 or 3 in-person meetings. So, if you're afraid to start a book study because you think my teachers won't have time to come every week to talk about it, there's a variety of ways to do it so it's manageable for your teachers. Okay. And then, other resources are the documentary Paper Tigers. It's about 10 years old now, but it is still very valid to see what a trauma-informed school is and the impact it has. Edutopia has great resources. You might write a newsletter for your school. I did that at Beech Grove and for my school, and then I did it for the district. And then at my last school in Shelbyville, we had Takeaway Tuesday. So every other Tuesday, I would just send out an email with a link to a video, an article, maybe a quote, and then teachers get a little information in manageable bits. Okay. And if you have the opportunity to visit a school that's implementing some of these strategies, it goes a long way in helping everybody understand what you want to accomplish. Um, when I was at Beech Grove, when we had the Lilly planning grant, my principal had told me, Trudy, whatever you need me to do to help you with that, I'm willing to do it. So I just happened to catch this news story on the evening news one night about the school in Baltimore that had replaced detention with a mindful moment room. And I loved it so much that I went and told my principal, I said, will you go to Baltimore with me? So another homeschool advisor and my principal and I, we went to Baltimore. We saw the Robert W. Coleman Elementary School program in action and got to talk to the people who developed it. And it was very worthwhile. Um, when we were looking at implementing these strategies over the whole district, the high school and the middle school, and we went to North Montgomery High School. Dr. Lori DeSatels has done a lot of work with that school, and they're very open to having visitors. And we got to meet with the principals. We got to see what they do in their advisory period with SEL lessons. We got to see their regulation room. So it really does help to see a program in action. Okay. And then I think exit tickets are very beneficial if you do a presentation to your staff. And I just kept it simple. 3 questions. What do I notice? What do I wonder? What is my takeaway? And they could answer 1, 2, or all 3 of those questions. And the teachers will write important things to you. Like the first time I did a presentation on trauma, I forgot to tell people this may be hard for you. It's okay if you need to take a break, do that, and then come back. And I had teachers write to me, this was really hard for me to hear. I have a high ACE score myself. So I wouldn't have stopped and thought about that. When I did a presentation on relationships, I had a teacher write, how do you make those kind of relationships like we saw in the videos? Well, I really had no idea that teachers needed really specific information about building positive relationships with students. So the next presentation I did provided that information. So I think the open kind of ended questions are much more beneficial in getting feedback from your staff than just like a Google form because we really don't know all the information or questions they have. Okay. And then I really like to provide my staff with experiences when I do presentations. If I want us to develop a community circle program, I include community building activities during presentations. If I want us to do regulation in the classroom or open a regulation room, I do mindfulness practices as part of my presentation. And then that way the teachers understand more about what we hope to build together. Okay. And then I think it's always good when you start a program to think about starting small. When I was at Central in Beech Grove and I wanted to start community circles, when I went and talked to my principal about it, Mr. Craig Buckler, he loved the idea, but he was afraid the teachers would not want to give up instruction time. So he said, we'll do a few pilot projects. So I sent an email to teachers and said I wanted to do some community building activities in the classroom. Would you allow me to come in and work with your class? Well, I had about 6 teachers accept that invitation. And it was the best advice I ever got because those teachers loved it. So the next school year, when we rolled it out school-wide, they were the cheerleaders. They were saying, you're going to love this. Your students are going to love it. I've seen it work. And then you want to look for your allies. The teacher on the left is Mrs. Page from Loper Elementary in Shelbyville. And when I started doing presentations on regulation, she approached me one day and she goes, I use mindfulness myself and I've tried to use it in my classroom and it just doesn't work. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And I said, you know what? I have a really good resource. I'm going to buy you a manual because I did have a budget when I worked in Shelbyville and a focusing chime. And and if it's okay with you, I'll come and get you started. I'll lead a few sessions and then I'll be there whenever you're ready to take over. And that's what we did. And she developed a wonderful mindfulness program in her classroom that was very creative and student centered. And so, look for those people that are like, or your allies. They want to try these things. They want to be some of the first to try it out because it will really go a long ways to help you when you roll it out school-wide. Okay. And then the community circles, you might call them morning meetings, and then also the closing circles at the end of the day. At the elementary level, it's really best to provide the circles daily. And then give your teachers resources. Teachers should not have to go out and create their own morning meeting plans. I mean, for 180 school days, that's just overwhelming. And it's not something that they've had training in. So we set up a shared Google folder and all the resources were there for 180 days. Okay. And then at the secondary level, it is different because you have teachers dealing with like 100 or 150 students a day. They have them for a short period during the day. So some high schools and middle schools have something like an advisory period or a homeroom. That would be a perfect place to maybe once a week do a SEL lesson that the teacher leads and you provide the resource for. And if you can even get your teachers to think about doing short community building activities each period, it goes a long way. One of our assistant principals at Central had taught at the high school, and he told me that he started every period with a question of the day. It took about 5 minutes, and he enjoyed it. The students enjoyed it, and it did a long ways to building community in the classroom. Okay. And this is just an example of a shared Google folder that we used at Beech Grove. I also set one up at the school in Shelbyville. But build your schedule around these relationship building activities and just be aware, if your teachers get concerned, well, how can I give up 15 minutes every day, if they're elementary? Well, really, when you're building relationships with your students, it does help with behaviors that may show up in the classroom because children are feeling safer. And that felt safety is just an important part of how students are successful at school and provide supports like this is probably going to be new for your teachers and the students. The students aren't used to sitting and listening to each other for 15 or 20 minutes. So like at Central, um, what we did, each grow's divided by grade level, so we were second and third grade. So all the second grade teachers had a support person with them, and Mr. Buckler used our specials teachers, and our aides. And then also the special ed teachers, if there was a room that had a lot of students that they were working with students for behavior, he assigned the special ed teachers to those classrooms. And then with the third grade, the principals rotated through the classrooms, and I rotated through all the classrooms. So sometimes you might need supports for the teachers to get the program started. Okay. And then this is just an example from Loper Elementary when we wrote it out, when we rolled out the community circles school-wide. The morning meetings was at the top, and that's exactly what we did. And closing circles was at the end of the day. And teachers need that permission, like at Loper, when we were doing the pilot projects, one of the teachers said, she goes, I love this. I love getting to know my students. They have so much fun. I'm having fun. But she goes, I feel a little guilty because I'm taking away instruction time. She goes, would you get Mr. Harpring to tell us it's okay to do this? And so it was there when the master schedule came out the next school year, it was right there. It was just an expectation. Okay. And then with co-regulation, if you're thinking about setting up a regulation room, um, you can think about it as being a tier one intervention where it's open and any child who becomes dysregulated is the room's available if somebody's available to be with them to help get them regulated. Or you can think about it as a tier two intervention. Like maybe you can identify some students who really need some work on regulation and they're scheduled maybe a couple of times a week to work with you or somebody else in the regulation room. And if you open it up as a tier one intervention, you do need to train your teachers on how to spot early signs of dysregulation. Because if you ask a teacher, how do you know when a student's becoming dysregulated? And they'll say things like they're yelling or they're throwing things or they're kicking their desk. Well, that's very dysregulated. But you can do a little PD where you teach them to look for tightness in the body, that crinkle up here at the eyebrows, the tightness around the jaw, um, breathing patterns change. We breathe faster, our breathing's more shallow. And you can kind of help them identify those early signs because that's when a regulation room is really successful, when you catch it early and then you can do some activities to help them be calmer and demonstrate the procedure for teachers, like during a staff meeting or a presentation that you're doing, like ask for a teacher to be a volunteer and just go through the steps that you're going to do with students in the regulation room. And I know when I did that at Shelbyville, like I had several teachers come up and say, "Oh, this is really going to help our students. I'm so glad you're doing this. I want to have some training to know how to do this because if there's an aide in my room, maybe I could take my student down to the regulation room." So having anything you can do to demonstrate what you're doing really goes a long ways to helping teachers understand. Okay. And then think about regulation in the classroom. And teachers can do, short regulation activities in the classroom. You need to provide them resources and some training. Um, and, if like when we did this at Central, it was an expectation. We wanted our teachers to lead 2 to 3 mindfulness practices a day. They had a manual from Calm Classroom and a focusing chime. And our principal asked them to make a schedule. Each team made a schedule, and then we put that in a shared Google folder. And that provides structure and accountability. When we did it at Loper, it was a little more on a voluntary basis. Um, but you can teach teachers, and if you're fortunate enough to have a budget as a school counselor or PTO money, if you can buy those resources for them, even we just had one teacher at Loper, like the fourth graders were already spending like they were rotating through 2 classrooms during the day. And we just had one teacher. All I did was give her a focusing chime and one of those expanding balls. And when the kids came in after lunch and recess, she just turned out the lights because this was her rotation. It wasn't her homeroom, it was the other teacher's homeroom. She turned out the lights and she used the focusing chime and she just did like 3 or 4 deep breaths with that expanding ball. And the kids were ready to learn. So it doesn't have to be real complicated, it can also be very simple. Okay. And then we always have to remember our teachers. The best tier one intervention is having a healthy teacher. And what we found out at Central is by the teachers leading these regulation practices in the classroom, that they were also benefiting from them. Like they told us, we did some questionnaires and things, but they told us in the questionnaires that they were feeling more regulated and that they were using these mindfulness practices on their own. So always remember your teacher with anything that you do with trauma-informed schools. Okay. And then I believe Amanda has a document that's a timeline for developing a trauma-informed school. It takes about 4 years to develop a trauma-informed school, but it just gives you like an outline of some things you could do over 4 years because remember, you're building slow and you're building small. And so you don't want to throw all kinds of things at your teacher the first year. You kind of want to spread it out. Okay. And then just some things to think about as you go through building your program. You need to always remember the power of homeostasis. All living organisms strive to maintain a balance. It's just like our furnaces and air conditioners, like we set the thermostat at 69, and when it goes down to 68, the furnace comes on. When it gets back up to 69, the furnace goes off. And people are no different. They like to stay in their lane. And, it's a normal occurrence when you're trying to implement a new program. So just remember that, as you deal with your staff. It doesn't really do anybody any good if you label it in a negative way, like resistance or, they're pushing back. It's really better to kind of keep your mindset on more positive ways to reframe behaviors that make your job a little more difficult. So just think of it in terms of homeostasis. That person is trying to stay in their comfort zone. This is new. It's going to take time. Okay. And then another thing you need to think about is everybody has a different reaction to change. It's a personality trait. We're not going to change that. And some people, if you say we're going to try something new, like they're all packed up, they're ready to go. Like, when do we start? Where are we going? Tell me more about it. And then other people are more reluctant, more hesitant, and they may hide from change. They don't want to change. They like things the way they are. And so you'll come across this as you make your interventions too. Is this a personality trait? It's not neither way we can label good or bad. It's just the way some people are. And again, it gives us more of a positive framework to view difficulties as they come along. Okay. And just remember to lay your foundation brick by brick. You're on a journey. It's not a sprint. It's not a race. And the better you are laying your foundation, the better the whole program's going to progress as you go through building it. Because, um, you know, we have to think in small chunks to get where we want to go. Okay. And then you need to also think in terms of support, patience, and pacing. You don't have to develop your program in a year. Like I said, it takes about 4 years to build a trauma-informed um, school program. So be patient with what you choose to use for interventions. Be patient with your teachers and other staff. Um, and you also need to pace it at the speed that your staff can go with you. Like I know one of the schools that I worked with about 3 years ago, I had given them some materials and was helping them do some of their professional development for their staff. And the school social worker just took off. She was like, she hit the floor running. She was doing a PD every month. And one of her teachers came up and said, "This is all great information," but she goes, "It's almost too much for me to take in." So the social worker, slowed down. She didn't present one month and then she went back to it. So we really need to be alert for pacing. We don't want to get to the point where we feel like we're pulling our staff to go with us on this journey. We want them to walk beside us. And our job is to point the direction that we want to go and to provide supports. Okay. And then some things to keep in mind when you're doing your training with your teachers is all teachers do need to be present. Like when I went to work at Shelbyville, the structure for their staff meetings was that they would start when the classroom teachers were ready. But there were still teachers and the assistant principal doing car rider duty, and they came in late and they would miss part of the staff meetings. So, what I did when I started doing my presentations is I just did some community building activities until everybody came in from duty, and then we could learn together. And then, you're not going to have 100% attendance every day, every time you do a presentation. So think about ways you can touch base with the staff who were absent that day. Okay. And then as you start to really build your program, just be aware that, you're going to have new staff join your school. So you may do some work to get them caught up and to share resources with them. And then sometimes you might need to revisit concepts with the staff that you've already been working with because like maybe like for greetings in the morning, you find out that, oh, they're forgotten. They're supposed to put their attention on the child for greetings in the morning instead of talking together in the hallway, So you might need to revisit a concept from time to time and make it in a friendly manner, not a critical manner, but just a friendly manner. Okay. And then also think about other staff. Like once you get your teachers, kind of on board with these, then think about how can you expand this like to the cafeteria, to the front office staff, to your bus drivers? And it doesn't have to be big things. It can be as simple as those people knowing the kids' names or asking the bus drivers to say, remember to say hello in the morning and goodbye when the child gets off the bus. Those simple kind of greetings go a long way in having the children feel like they're valued and they're special. Okay. And then in time, discipline will change. Discipline is a big thing. Like Dr. Lori Desautels, I've heard her say before that when your discipline fundamentally changes, that's when you know you have a trauma responsive school. And I agree with her on that. Um, and it's not just discipline that the principals are doing, but it's those discipline actions the teachers are doing in the classroom too. So I'm going to share with you some quotes from principals I've worked with and how they say that learning about trauma and regulation has helped them change what they do with students when they discipline them. So this principal saw that she's doing more, responsive things, not just reactive things. Like she's focused on that relationship with the student when she talks to them. She's trying to understand the needs of the child. She's giving the child an opportunity to share their voice. She's always looking for what's underneath the behavior, trying to look at is there triggers that maybe we can take care of so that they don't flip their lid. And she was always kind of aware of her teacher's brain states too. And she saw her job as to co-regulate the child. Okay. And then this is from one of my assistant principals. But again, she saw her actions as being proactive based on the needs of the child, considering the child's brain state and trying to use herself as a calming mechanism. She always tried to remember the trauma and trying to understand that. And something she started saying to students when she started talking to them is she just started asking them, do you need from me? And sometimes they could tell her, okay. And then this principal said that he found that just saying, tell me more about that. that really opened the door, and he would have some good discussions with students from that. And so the discussions about behavior were calmer and they were more cooperative. Okay. And then another thing, you might want to look at is, what is your school or district mission statement? And this statement, my daughter happens to teach at Frisco Independent School District, and she shared this with me. And I think this is a great trauma-informed school or district mission. Know every student by name and need. It says it all just in a few simple words. Okay. And then data is important. And I used to be a person that hated data till I did my first Gold Star project with Sue Reynolds. And then I really enjoyed data. But if you can collect some data, and you don't have to, make it complicated or very, very time consuming. But if you can collect some data, it will show the effectiveness of your interventions. And when you share those kind of successes that you're seeing in the data, then that gives the teachers encouragement to keep doing the good work that they're doing. And you can highlight your strengths. You can also maybe identify even areas that you might need to look at for improvement. Okay. So the most simple data you can collect is this discipline data, like number of office referrals, number of suspensions, number of bus write-ups. So, it's really good if you have a baseline, like the year before you start your program, if you can get those numbers from your principal or assistant principal. And then the next year when you start doing the interventions, then you can look for growth at the end of the school year. Are your office referrals down? Are your suspensions down? Are your bus write-ups down? And then if you do open a regulation room, um, just simple data to collect. Is this the number of visits to the regulation room? And like at both of my schools, it was really pretty common to have about over 400 visits to the regulation room in a school year. And that was with me mainly being the person available to do it. So if your school is fortunate enough to have an aide assigned to a regulation room, which some schools do, just think of the number of visits and the impact you could have on students. And then also looking at the percent of students who were successful on the same day they visited the regulation room. And I just looked at the discipline data, the assistant principal gave me every month. And then I looked at when kids visited what we call the mindful moment room. And, if they didn't have an office visit or suspension on the same day, then that was considered a successful day. So we had high success rates for the kids that were visitors to the mindful moment room. It's also good to look at growth in knowledge and practice for your staff. The book 10 Steps to Create a Trauma-Informed School has a really good survey, and you can modify that and put that in a Google form, and then again have a baseline, and then give the survey like at near the end of each school year. And just you can see the growth in your teachers, both in knowledge and practice that way. And then qualitative data is very important too. Like teachers, like if they use some of these interventions that you've been talking about, like they're so happy to share them with you. And they can't believe that just a simple thing like asking a child to take 3 deep breaths with you, they can't believe that prevented a kid flipping their lid. And they're so happy to tell you about that. So look for that qualitative data too. Okay. And then just remember that programs don't change students. This is something I've heard Dr. Lori DeSatel say numerous times. It's really the people within the school who change students. So it's not a matter of buying the right program. It's really about helping people change their mindsets, change what they're doing so they can better support students. Okay. And then, you know, when you're developing a program, um, it's not linear and sometimes it's not smooth. Um, you know, you're going to have hills, you're going to have curves, you're going to have bumps, you're going to have obstacles. But you're on a journey and it's a big journey. And, you know, every step you take in the direction that you want to go is wonderful. And sometimes you take steps backwards. But the important thing is if you do feel like you've gone backwards a little bit, then find a way to keep moving forward. And the end result will be something that your school will really feel good about. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Trudy, for sharing a little bit about your experience and your journey and your time in your different schools. I am going to close us out. However, if you do have any questions for Trudy while she is still with us, please feel free to add that into the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and ask that question. If you want to receive a PGP point for your license renewal for attending today's session, you can click on the link here or scan the QR code. It will take you to a very brief session evaluation, after which you will receive an email with your PGP certificate. We have some upcoming events happening still here in February and then in early March. So take a look at what we have coming up and check out the registration page for more information. We're also happy to share that we will be hosting a prepare workshop in person at CIESC in Indianapolis in April. So that is a 2-day, it's back-to-back days in April. So if you're interested in learning more, you can visit the registration link on the slide. Finally, just some resources if you want to check out any of these. All of our on-demand sessions, blogs, podcast episodes, DIY PD guides, everything can be found in that digital content library there on the left. You also may want to check out the school counseling curriculum library, which was launched in the fall, that has lots of different counseling lessons that you could use as is, or you can adapt and use as needed. And then finally, here's contact information for us. If you need to reach out and ask any follow-up questions, please feel free to do that. And with that, I am not seeing any other questions in the chat. So I am going to end our session. And Trudy, thank you so much again for your time and sharing your expertise. You are greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.